For decades, the nations of Southeast Asia have skillfully navigated the complex currents flowing between global superpowers. Nestled in a region of immense strategic and economic importance, these countries perfected the art of hedging, a delicate diplomatic dance designed to avoid choosing a single side. They sought to maintain strong security ties with the United States while simultaneously reaping the economic benefits of a rising China. This strategy allowed them to maximize their autonomy and prosperity, drawing the best from both worlds without being beholden to either. It was a pragmatic approach born from the lessons of history, where aligning too closely with one power often invited conflict or subjugation by another. However, the geopolitical landscape has undergone a dramatic transformation over the past 30 years. The relatively simple power dynamics of the post-Cold War era have given way to a much more direct and intense rivalry between Washington and Beijing. As China's comprehensive power has grown to nearly match that of the United States, its influence in its own backyard has expanded exponentially. This shift has made the traditional hedging strategy increasingly difficult to sustain. The pressure to choose, once a distant concern, is now a palpable reality for leaders from Jakarta to Bangkok, forcing them to re-evaluate long-standing foreign policy doctrines in the face of new opportunities and risks. This subtle but significant drift toward China is not a uniform movement across the entire region, but a clear trend is emerging. An analysis of alignment over the past 3 decades reveals a discernible pattern. Take Indonesia, for example. Between 1995 and 2009, it was considered marginally pro-US in its orientation. Yet in the period from 2010 to 2024, it has shifted to become marginally pro-China. Similarly, Thailand, a historic US treaty ally that once sat squarely in the hedging camp, has now tilted noticeably toward Beijing's sphere of influence. These movements are not sudden ruptures but gradual realignments driven by a pragmatic calculation of national interest. Even countries that remain formally aligned with the United States, like the Philippines, are not immune to this gravitational pull. While Manila's security relationship with Washington remains robust, its overall alignment has still moved closer to China's orbit over the last 15 years. This complex dynamic illustrates that the region is not simply flipping a switch from one superpower to the other. Instead, nations are recalibrating their positions along a spectrum, responding to the changing distribution of power and influence. The old balancing act is over, replaced by a new and more challenging navigation of great power competition that is reshaping the future of Asia. The primary force pulling Southeast Asian nations closer to China is overwhelmingly economic. For the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, China is not just a neighbor. It is the largest trading partner, a voracious market for raw materials, and a critical source of consumer goods. This economic interdependence has deepened profoundly over the past 30 years, creating a powerful incentive for regional governments to maintain friendly and productive relations with Beijing. For many leaders, especially in non-democratic states, political legitimacy is intrinsically tied to economic performance and delivering prosperity to their people. In this context, China is not seen as an ideological rival, but as an indispensable partner for growth and stability. China's influence extends far beyond simple trade statistics. The Belt and Road Initiative has become a flagship of Beijing's economic statecraft, financing and constructing massive infrastructure projects across the region. From high-speed railways in Indonesia and Laos to ports and industrial parks in Cambodia, these projects address a critical need for development that has often been underserved by Western institutions. While the United States remains a larger source of overall foreign direct investment, China's Belt and Road investments are highly visible, politically significant, and directly aligned with the national development goals of recipient countries. This tangible progress creates deep-seated goodwill and strengthens political ties between Beijing and regional capitals. Furthermore, China offers a model of partnership that many Southeast Asian governments find highly appealing. Unlike the United States and other Western powers, Beijing adheres to a strict policy of non-interference in the domestic affairs of other countries. It provides investment, loans, and military aid without attaching conditions related to human rights, democracy, or governance. For a regime like Cambodia's, which faced criticism and sanctions from the West, China's unconditional political and economic support became a vital lifeline. This approach allows leaders to pursue their domestic agendas without fear of external pressure or naming and shaming, making China a reliable and predictable partner in a turbulent world. This economic magnetism is reinforced by high-level diplomatic engagement. Chinese leaders are frequent visitors to Southeast Asian capitals, and regional leaders are, in turn, regularly welcomed in Beijing. When Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto was elected in 2024, his very first state visit was to China, signaling the high priority placed on the relationship. This consistent and respectful diplomacy stands in contrast to what is sometimes perceived as sporadic attention from Washington. The combination of immense trade volumes, transformative infrastructure projects, and a policy of non-interference creates a powerful gravitational pull that is steadily reorienting the region's economic and political compass toward Beijing. The United States' approach to Southeast Asia has evolved significantly, contributing inadvertently to the region's tilt toward China. For much of the 1990s and 2000s, U.S. policy was built on an assumption of engagement, believing that integrating China into the global system would lead to its political liberalization. The Obama administration's pivot to Asia was the first major acknowledgement of China's rising power, but it still did not frame the relationship as one of pure rivalry. However, this changed dramatically with the first Trump administration, which officially designated China as a strategic competitor and geopolitical threat, a stance that has been largely maintained and even intensified since. This shift has placed Southeast Asian nations in an uncomfortable position, caught between two giants demanding loyalty. This new era of explicit US-China competition has generated considerable anxiety in the region. Many Southeast Asian leaders worry about being forced to make a definitive choice that could jeopardize their economic ties with China or their security partnerships with the United States. The rhetoric from Washington, which often frames the contest in stark ideological terms of democracy versus autocracy, does not always resonate with regional governments that prioritize stability and economic development above all else. Furthermore, the perceived inconsistency in U.S. commitment to the region, particularly with shifts between administrations, has stoked fears that Washington may not be a reliable long-term partner, especially when its focus appears to be elsewhere. In contrast, China's policy is characterized by its consistency, proximity, and focus on tangible benefits. Beijing's diplomatic messaging is relentlessly centered on shared prosperity, mutual respect, and a vision of an Asia for Asians. This narrative is backed by concrete actions, such as the aforementioned infrastructure investments and trade agreements that directly benefit regional economies. While the United States offers security guarantees and champions a rules-based international order, China offers roads, bridges, and markets. For many people and politicians in the region, the latter are far more immediate and impactful in their daily lives, making Beijing's embrace feel closer and more relevant than Washington's more distant promises. Recent U.S. actions highlight this dynamic. In early 2025, the U.S. Secretary of Defense visited the Philippines to reaffirm an ironclad security commitment amid maritime disputes with China, a move welcomed in Manila. However, the visit notably excluded Thailand, another U.S. treaty ally that has been drifting toward Beijing. This selective engagement can send a mixed message, reinforcing the perception among some nations that U.S. attention is conditional and primarily focused on containing China rather than on fostering broader regional prosperity. This contrast in policy execution, America's focus on security alliances versus China's comprehensive economic and diplomatic engagement, is a key factor shaping the region's strategic calculus. While the general trend in Southeast Asia is a lean toward China, the region is far from monolithic, and several key nations are still attempting to maintain a delicate balance. Countries like Singapore and Malaysia exemplify the modern hedging strategy. They have moved marginally closer to China, particularly on the economic front, but continue to maintain robust security, political and social ties with the United States and the West. Singapore, for instance, hosts a significant U.S. naval presence while also being a major hub for Chinese finance and technology. These nations understand that their security and prosperity depend on preventing either superpower from achieving total dominance in the region, and their diplomacy is a masterclass in navigating ambiguity. Interestingly, Vietnam stands out as the only country in the region that has moved slightly toward the United States over the last 15 years. Haunted by a history of conflict with its northern neighbor and engaged in tense maritime disputes in the South China Sea, Hanoi sees a strong partnership with Washington as a crucial counterweight to Chinese pressure. This has transformed Vietnam from a country firmly in China's camp to one on the cusp of becoming a hedger. This strategic shift underscores how national histories and specific security threats can override broader economic trends, leading to unique foreign policy alignments that defy simple regional generalizations. The implications of this regional realignment for Asia and the world are profound. A Southeast Asia that is more closely integrated with China economically and politically could solidify a new sphere of influence, challenging the US-led order that has defined the region since the end of World War II. This could lead to a more divided world, where economic and technological ecosystems are split into competing blocs. The future of international norms, particularly concerning maritime law in the South China Sea, could be increasingly shaped by Beijing's preferences. The ability of the United States to project power and influence in this critical part of the world will depend on its capacity to offer a compelling alternative to China's vision. Ultimately, the choices made in the capitals of Southeast Asia over the next decade will help determine the future global balance of power. The region's trajectory is not predetermined. It will be shaped by the domestic political needs of each country, the economic opportunities presented by both China and the United States, and the perceived reliability of their respective security commitments. As these nations continue to navigate the turbulent waters between the two giants, their collective decisions will create a new Asian order. The world will be watching closely, for as Southeast Asia goes, so too may go the 21st century.